Alright, so this video is going to be about how you create an opening in the clay and you widen that out. I want you to make sure that you're looking at the steps that I have for you on the wall, which show all the steps to make this cylindrical form. So at this point, we've placed the clay on, we've centered it, we're going to do our starting hole. So the key is that to make the hole, we don't want to press all the way through until we're touching the metal. We got to make sure that we leave about 1/4 of an inch of clay down on the bottom, so that way we have some clay that's on the underside of our project. So you'll still be going at a pretty fast speed. You don't necessarily have to go full speed. And there's a couple ways that you can create your opening. You can either hold your hands on either side and press down with your thumbs to open. But the way that I usually like to do it is actually take one hand, rest it up against this edge of the wheel basin, and then I'll use 2 fingers and press down into the center to find it. So water is a necessity. So I'm starting to press down. I'm doing most of my movement with my middle finger here to press down into the clay. You'll have some clay that comes off on your finger. Fill that hole with water. Press down until you think you have about 1/4 of an inch. Now, it's better to leave more clay than needed, because you can always, when you're trimming your pottery from the underside, take some of the clay away. So after we've made our hole, we're going to be widening the base. So we draw back towards ourselves to widen the base. So you do that by pressing those fingers in again, so mostly with your middle finger and then kind of supporting it with your index finger, and you pull back towards yourself. Do it very slowly, because you want to make sure that the clay still stays real even. Keep coming back with more water. And you widen it up. For doing the cylinder, you probably want to leave a hole that's about 2 inches or so. You want to have a lot of clay that you can actually raise the height of the cylinder, because you're going for about 4 inches in height. Okay, the next step is where you compress the bottom. So a tool that you want to use would be a sponge, and not the large sponge, but one of the smaller sponges. So this little round sponge is what you'll use. Get the sponge wet so that way it's not going to be taking a lot of moisture away from the clay. And while it's still spinning at the same speed, I want you to put the sponge in and press it down up against the clay. Like you'll remember from any time working with clay, when you add pressure, you add strength. So what I've done here is I've added some strength to the bottom of my project just by using the sponge. Okay? Next, what we're going to do is compress the top edge. So to do that, you're going to create an alligator pinch. So that is with your index finger and your thumb on one hand, and then the other hand is going to come in like this. So it becomes an alligator, and then you've got a top finger on top here that'll help to compress. You'll probably take away a little bit of the clay. What this is going to do is make it so you have an even top to your pottery to begin with here. That's important, so that way your walls start even, and they'll be more likely to stay even. Okay, next up what we're going to do is we're going to pull up the sides of your cylinder. So to do that, you're going to take your fans and you're going to lock them together. This is called a butterfly pull, where you have interlocked thumbs, so that way your hands move at the same time. I'm going to be touching the clay using my middle fingers and supported by my index fingers. You always start on the bottom of your pottery and you move up. So on the bottom, and then you move your way up. You always have to start fresh with new water as you do each pull. Now it's better to go medium speed, like you see that my pottery is always already doing. I start at the bottom and I start to raise with pressure pottery up. I'm going to do another pull here because we're trying to go for 4 inches in height. It's always good to start with a ridge. So usually we'll take a little bit of clay away from the bottom with each pull. So that way I've got a little groove, and I can use that groove to guide my hands as I pull the clay up. It's always important to try to finish off your pull. And then if you need to, you can compress the top as you go. So alligator pinch again, flatten the top, make another ridge, the thickness that you're going for is roughly about 1/4 of an inch, or you can just think of your pinky thickness, kind of like what we were doing with pinch pots. So from there, this is almost done. I just have a little bit too much thickness at the bottom of the pottery, so I'm just going to do a little more pulling just down there. If you feel like the shape is not getting the way that you want, you can actually just take both hands and go on the outside of your pottery and kind of create a circle that you're pushing in on your pottery. So, kind of like this. It'd be a good way to make that cylinder be nice and straight. Okay. After you've done this, some of the finishing touches are to get rid of any of the moisture that's on the inside of the clay. So I can take a sponge, soak that water up. I can use a rib tool to make the edges of the walls look really nice. So using a rib tool like this, usually we'll get it a little bit wet with some water first. I can push that up against the side of my project. If you use the rounded side, you can kind of create different shapes. We're just going for a cylinder on this one. I'll do an additional tutorial on creating other kinds of shapes. This is called a little chamois. It's actually just leather, but we can use this to make it so that the top edge is nice and smooth. Because if this is going to be a cup, we'd want to have a nice smooth edge on the top. Okay, so if you get it really wet, kind of like soak up, so that way it's like a nice and flexible. That can be a great way to kind of finish off the top rim. So next up, what we'll do is we'll trim up the bottom. So I'll take as much of the clay off of the board here as I can. I like to create a little indent where the glaze can catch, so that when I glaze this, I can glaze pretty much the whole thing. So you can use a rib tool or any of the modeling tools to create a ridge. Kind of take some of that clay off. If you feel like you've got a lot of clay at the bottom of your project, this is a good way to kind of take some of that off so that we don't have to do as much trimming later after we dry it out a little bit and flip it over. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to remove this from the wheel head. So to do that, we're going to take some water, going to add it onto the surface here. Going to create like a nice little ice rink for it to come off the board here. So now that I've got the water on there, I'm going to use a wire. The reason I added that water on was so that way, as I'm putting this wire underneath, I'm pushing water underneath the project. So we've got, it's going to be suspended and floating off the top of the metal. Okay, I come at a different angle and I do the same thing. You can already see that it's going to start to slide a little bit. Okay. So then from there, if you've got that little ridge that you made, you can slide the project until you can get one hand underneath. Okay. You really want to avoid touching the walls of your project so that way it stays looking nice.